devotion. Two hands with equal fame. We whisper dreams and devotion.
My name is Katie Unthank. I'm the Director of Strategic Communications here at PAI. Thank you and welcome for our next Catalyst session. Today we're going to be led by PAI's President and CEO, Nabeeha Kazi Hutchins. She will be interviewing the Chair of the International Steering Committee for the International Conference on Family Planning, Phillip Anglewicz. We are going to have a wonderful conversation. We are conducting this in English. If you would like to join via via Spanish or French, you can click on the interpretation link at the bottom and select your preferred language. We are also going to be recording and sharing today's webinar. So if you know anyone who is unable to join, let them know they can still register and we'll be able to share that with them. We're also going to be having a Q&A at the end of the conversation. You can use the chat or the Q&A function to submit your questions. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Nabeeha Kazi Hutchins, who is going to give some opening remarks, and then we'll be joined by Phil. So with that, I give you Nabeeha.
Thank you so much. Greetings to all who are joining us today, and welcome to the PAI Catalyst session. My name is Nabeeha Kazi Hutchins. I serve as President and CEO of PAI. We're a civil society advocacy organization that's based in Washington, D.C., and this year marks our 60th anniversary. For those 60 years, we've been championing sexual and reproductive health and rights around the world, while also holding the U.S. government accountable, as well as multilateral and bilateral institutions and mechanisms accountable. We are working hard to make sure that reproductive health care is prioritized, that it's supported, and it's viewed as essential for the health and vitality of women, youth, and their communities. But we don't go it alone. We have supported an expanded civil society for SRHR advocacy around the world. And we do this by supporting local partners, stewarding a range of programs that are focused on advocacy and accountability, and also the recognition that local communities are best equipped to hold their decision makers accountable. And as such, we're very proud of our global partner network that spans across 35 countries. And I'm so thankful to many of you who've joined us today, thankful for the collaborations and the partnerships that we have together, and all of your work to advance those critical policy, legal, and community programs to ensure that healthcare and rights are not only guaranteed, but they are also delivered upon. So I welcome all of you, and I thank you for your voice and your commitment to our shared cause. Now, today's Catalyst session convenes us at a pivotal inflection point. And it's a critical point for global reproductive health and rights. We all know that we're operating in a world where the political and financial landscape have shifted beneath our feet, and development financing is further strained. We're seeing escalating debt burden. We're seeing a range of donor priorities being redirected or re-strategized. Health systems are under pressure, expecting to do more with less. And of course, the shocks that we see from climate to humanitarian emergencies and more. So at the same time, we're also confronting a well-organized, well-resourced movement that is intent on reversing the progress that we've made for sexual and reproductive health and rights, challenges to bodily autonomy, challenges to reproductive justice, and this is all around the world. And despite that backdrop, we're also in a moment where we have such strong supporters and dedicated leaders. And we collectively are not giving up, no matter the challenges. We know that our collective action can meaningfully evolve towards stronger systems and greater access. And we have an opportunity to preserve and protect that. We have to safeguard it, and we have a chance to build and to push further, making sure that we are aligning across sectors, across regions, to really elevate the evidence and to really reinforce the catalytic and essential role that sexual and reproductive health have in advancing economic gains and education attainment, in climate resilience, and in equity. And it is precisely the power of community and collective action that we're going to be talking about today. We are exactly a week away from the International Family Planning Conference, which takes place in Bogotá, Colombia, and it's going to be a powerful gathering for our community, both virtually and in person. Now, I suspect many of you who are on this call are attending or will be following online. The conference is the world's largest scientific convening of professionals that are working in family planning and sexual and reproductive health and rights. This is really a high impact forum to share research, to share program innovations and policy commitments. And since 2009, the conference has evolved into this global platform that brings together researchers, implementers, policymakers, advocates, artists, civil society members, young people, and more from over 120 countries. Now, I want to talk to you about the song that we just heard playing as you joined the discussion today. It's titled Solo Igualdad, and it comes to us from a Tanzanian artist and an advocate, William Otuk. He's a musician who uses his craft to elevate social justice and reproductive rights. And if you were able to hear most of the song, its opening verse, "We met in shining Colombia after I cross over the seas," to its vibrant Solo Igualdad, which means only equality in Spanish. The song really embodies the hope and solidarity that are meant to define ICFP. I also have to share a bit of a personal anecdote that we at PAI are very proud of, that Otuk has been a valued partner to PAI. We've been working in coalition to advance sexual and reproductive health and rights and budget and government accountability for family planning in Tanzania. So it was very special to see this song featured. And in the chat, Katie will share the link to the ICFP page so you can learn more about the song and also listen to the full song when you have time. So on to our guest today. It is my sincere pleasure to have Dr. Phillip Anglewicz as our guest for today's Catalyst session. Phil is the director of the William H. Gates William H. Gates Senior Institute for Population and Reproductive Health and professor of the Department of Population, Family, and Reproductive Health at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. That is a mouthful. In addition to that, you are chair of the steering committee for the 2025 International Family Planning Conference. And I want to share a little bit about Phil's background before we get into our discussion. Phil's a demographer whose career is focused on understanding how people's lives and choices, particularly around family planning and reproductive health, shape and are shaped by broader demographic and health trends, especially those in sub-Saharan Africa. Phil leads the Performance Monitoring for Action platform known as PMA. It's been one of the most influential global data initiatives that are tracking family planning, access, contraceptive use dynamics, and the performance of reproductive health systems over time. And his leadership really places him at the center of how we use evidence to inform policy, accountability, and also investment decisions in our field. I'm very fortunate, and we as a community are very fortunate to have Phil at the helm of the conference and his leadership at the Gates Institute, but also to have him today as we look ahead to what's happening in Colombia and then beyond. So Phil, a warm welcome and thank you for joining us. I know you're in Colombia, so I really appreciate you taking the time, but welcome.
Thanks very much for the introduction. It's great to be with you all today.
Well, so Phil, you're in Bogotá right now, is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, I arrived here just about 3 days ago.
How's it going over there?
It's great. The excitement is building. I think we're ready to go.
Excellent, excellent. Well, we're very excited to talk about a range of items today. Certainly, we'll talk about the conference, but also on how data and advocacy work together. How are we taking the work forward? What does this mean for our community? And I guess, you know, before we get into all of that, you've had a very interesting journey that is now has led to the Gates Institute. I'd love to know a little bit about your background, how you first got drawn into this field, and, you know, just a little bit more about you.
Sure. So I think really what brought me to this field ultimately was my experience as a Peace Corps volunteer. So between 1998 and 2000, I lived in a rural village in northern Malawi and essentially worked as a community health volunteer. So it was incredible experience that still, I think, influences the work that I do now. But I lived for 2 years in this setting where there was no electricity at this point, no running water, no phone access, no cell phones at that point. This is pre-cell phone era. And a lot of what I did was going on a daily basis to the health clinic that I lived across the street from. And I basically served whatever purpose was needed at that point. But a lot of the times, what I did was work at like the maternal child health clinic, and also help out with family planning related tasks too. So this, I think, gave me a firsthand, point of view into the lives of people that live in rural parts of the world, like rural Malawi. And it's really from that perspective that you can see the value and huge importance of family planning. So at the point when I lived in Malawi, fertility rates were incredibly high. And I think it was, access to contraception was fairly limited. But certainly, I think the demand for controlling fertility and limiting, being able to achieve desired family size was certainly evident at that point too. So being able to see that directly, through that experience, I think still, again, guides the work that I do today.
And I understand that we will have many colleagues from Malawi joining, so it'll be, I'm sure, interesting for you to connect with them as well, although I know you work closely with colleagues in Malawi already.
I do, and I'm thrilled to have the chance to actually speak the local languages with someone because not a lot of people know Chichewa or Chitumbuka. So if you're a Malawian on this call or attending ICFP, please come approach me so we can have a conversation.
Amazing, amazing. So, Phil, you're trained as a demographer. I would love to know how does that demography lens really shape how we approach reproductive health research and policy?
Yeah, I mean, demography, I think, is getting increasingly recognized as being critical, sort of underpinning theme to a lot of what we talk about today. So I feel like when I studied demography, it wasn't nearly as prominent in everyday conversation. But now, when I look at newspapers, a lot of what we're talking about are demographic issues like low fertility, and is low fertility a bad thing, and if so, for who, and if so, why? Things like population aging, which we're seeing rapid growth in the 60 and over population in virtually every country in the world. So I think a demographic lens is increasingly relevant. So when I see all this, public attention to demography, it kind of makes me feel good because that wasn't really the case 20 years ago when I studied it in my doctoral program. But for family planning, reproductive health, I think it's so inextricably tied to demography. Demography really focuses on three main processes: mortality, migration, and fertility. And for a long time, demography was focused on fertility decline and what are the factors that will lead to fertility decline at the individual and population level. And the biggest factor that influences fertility decline is family planning, reproductive health, and contraceptive use. So that basically means that demography, family planning are closely tied together and still remain relevant. And I think having this demographic lens also introduces you to other concepts that are relevant to family planning, reproductive health too. Things like the demographic dividend, things like, again, low fertility, as well as infertility and the factors that influence, fertility dynamics. So again, I think I feel fortunate to have been trained in demography because it's increasingly relevant and helps to focus the work that I do in a really useful manner.
It has been very interesting to see the evolution of demography from more than just a population numbers perspective and
Absolutely.
really moving toward what we know are more person-centered or community-centered indicators around agency and choice and quality of life and some of those lived experiences. I do have to ask you, though, and while that is very important for the global health community and certainly for the sexual and reproductive health and rights community, this shift is very important. However, in practice, how does this land with policymakers? And I raise this because, even as we look at the political landscape, there's power in numbers, right? And I know that some politicians and some political environments see population decline as a threat in terms of their power, their electoral power, their ability to case make for additional funding for their districts or their states or their provinces. So how do we reconcile what we know is desirable in the right direction with what really resonates with political leadership?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think really that makes me think a lot about the data that we use to inform policy and programs. And so family planning, I think, as a field has a great advantage over many others in that it has a really strong set of well-established indicators that we've known for 50 plus years. So things like modern contraceptive use, unmet need, demand for contraception, these are measures that are well established. They've been validated, they've been used extensively. They're known not just by researchers, they're used by people in countries when they're looking at their fertility and family planning dynamics. So it's a great thing, and not all fields have these measures, and these measures serve different purposes. So modern contraceptive use gives a sense of access and demand and things like that. But unmet need is not just an important measure because it tells you about, like the demand for contraception to some extent, with some caveats. But it also, I think, is a really powerful advocacy tool because the term unmet need, I think, is something that I think gives you a sense of the reaction and the importance of contraception too. But at this point, I think the field has really evolved, and we're no longer focused on the exact same approach that we had 50, 70 years ago when these measures were developed. Now, these measures really were meant to capture things at the population level, like the country level, and they weren't really meant to capture individual level, demand or preferences or, interests. And that's, I think, what's important now. So the way that we've evolved as a field, I think, is going from looking at just the population level to focusing on the individual level. And this is what you mentioned a minute ago, Nabeeha, is really, I think that it's critical that when we're looking at family planning indicators, that we're capturing individual preferences and demands and interests as much as we are capturing things at the population level. So what we really want as a field now, I think, and what should guide our measurements in the future is being able to capture the extent to which individuals are able to control their reproductive preferences and their fertility preferences. So that's, I think, where the field is going, and I think that we have really good momentum moving us in that direction.
And speaking of momentum, Phil, we know that data and evidence is power, and that is especially essential for civil society and for advocates. Of course, as we've talked about, that power only matters if it can move decision makers. And I would love to hear from your perspective, what blind spots do we have as it relates to utilizing data and really understanding or integrating demographic evidence for that policy change, for domestic financing, and so on and so forth?
Well, that's a great question because I think it brings up a really critical point for the field right now. So over the last, 9 months to a year, the field has gone through a number of really critical changes, fundamental structural changes to how we operate. And that particularly applies to data. So again, family planning, reproductive health is a field that relies heavily on data. And we've relied on surveys basically for the whole history of what we've done, starting with the World Fertility Surveys back in the 1980s, and then more recently for the past 30 plus years, the demographic and health surveys. So with the dismantling of USAID back in January, February, that had a profound impact on programs around the world, on development and global health, but also on data, because it essentially meant that the demographic and health surveys, which we've relied upon again extensively for years as critical source of data, has an uncertain future. Now, fortunately, I think the short-term version of that future has been shored up due to the work of the Gates Foundation. So it's great that at least there's some short-term possibilities that keeps the DHS running, so we can now access the data. And data sets are being finished up, and there's some data collection that I understand is being planned too. But still, the longer-term future of data is very much uncertain. And other population-based surveys like PMA, which you referred to earlier, Nabeeha, has similarly an uncertain future, as well as mixed multiple indicator cluster surveys and other surveys as well, don't have the same stability that they used to. So when we're talking about how we make decisions in the future, how we evaluate programs, how we inform direct the work and resources that we have in the field, I think a lot of that is really in some jeopardy because the data that I think helps guide our actions is lacking, and that's I think a critical problem that really needs to be solved.
Well, and Phil, so much of the conversation that will happen at ICFP, in particular, those that are grounded in the research and the evidence and the data, have used all of the platforms or benefited from all the platforms and mechanisms that you've noted over the decades, over many decades, to be able to tell the story of where we are and how we need to move forward, what we need to preserve, what worked, what didn't work. So it is absolutely critical. I do want
Exactly.
to, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just said exactly. I totally agree. Yeah.
So we are a week away, as I mentioned, from the conference. Kicks off next Monday. It is the world's largest scientific gathering for family planning and reproductive health. Tell us a little bit about who's going to be there, what we can expect, those of us in person, those who will be joining virtually, and what do you hope some of the outcomes from this global gathering are going to be?
So thanks a lot for the question. Really glad to have the chance to talk about ICFP, and again, just so excited that it's just a week away. This is just fantastic. I think at first I just want to start with, what you mentioned in your introduction to Nabeeha, that we're at a critical point for the field due to a lot of the changes that have taken place over the past nine months to a year. And that really affected us at ICFP, where throughout the whole process of planning ICFP, which, it takes well more than a year to plan this conference, we had various checkpoints that gave us insight into like, well, where are we as a conference and where are we as a field? Because really the conference is a barometer for where the field is. So if you have a robust conference, that tells you that, where you are as a field as well. And, along the way, we had various checkpoints that gave us a sense of where we were. The first of which I wanted to point out was abstract submissions. So our previous record for abstract submissions was around 3,200 or so for the last conference in Thailand. This year, we were so thrilled that we just blew the doors off that. And we hit a record 5,200 abstract submissions. So not only did we break the record, we totally just destroyed it, which is fantastic. And then when we looked at registration what started strong and remained strong. So we're going to be able to meet the level of in-person participants that we've had in previous years, despite, I think, some of the headwinds that we face as a field. So to the extent that the conference is a barometer for the field, I think it shows that the field at this point is really robust. And I don't think that's a surprise to anyone, because I think if you work in family planning, reproductive health, you face adversity. It's pretty common that we have to deal with things like the global gag rule that goes on and off, with the change of administrations in the United States. So we're used to these kind of headwinds. We're used to this kind of adversity, and we always respond to this. So, I think it's no surprise, but it's still, I think, great to see these numbers and great that we have the participants that we do at ICFP. So in terms of what I expect that, first of all, we're going to be tackling some of these critical conversations that you just described, Nabeeha. So in terms of financing, where are we right now? Like, what does global financing for our work look like? We're going to be talking about commitments and the fact that I think there are new countries and new private entities in the field and others that are making renewed commitments to the work that we do, which I think is fantastic and inspiring. We're going to be talking about tough issues like low fertility. Is it a problem? And if so, when and where? We'll be talking about how do you communicate outside of our field. I think we're really good at communicating the value of the work that we do to each other when we're to those who are indoctrinated in the value of family planning. But when we talk to people outside the field, it's important, I think, to use different tactics. And for us to expand, I think we really need to fully embrace that. And we'll also be talking about things like domestic resource mobilization for the field and other topics and pronatalism as well, the growth of pronatalism that you referred to earlier. So all of these, I think, are going to be featured themes of the conference that starts next week.
It's so inspiring, truly, to just hear how, in many ways, our community is doubling down. Even if you can't be there in person, you're going to be there virtually. And for me, that's inspiring, above and beyond all of the great content and discussions that will be convened and come together because of ICFP. I think it's also, for me, very much a show of solidarity. Now, speaking of the show of solidarity and just the resilience, right? This ICFP is historic. It's the first one in the Latin America region in its 15-year history. And I would appreciate knowing a little bit about what you see as unique opportunities, what are we going to learn uniquely by hosting this conference in Bogotá? And what are you most excited about, as well as your advice for those who are attending both in person, but then also virtually?
I think for me, the most exciting part is that we're in a new region. So I think it's long overdue that we've set ICFP in LAC region. And I think the value of doing so has been reinforced again and again. Colombia has some just inspiring and really progressive and fantastic policies related to the work that we do. And I think historically, LAC as a region received a lot of attention 30 years ago, 40 years ago, but then it sort of dropped off in the global discussion. And I think that's a detriment because a lot of what other countries are going through now, countries in LAC faced 20, 30 years ago. So I think there's really valuable cross-regional discussion that can happen that we're deliberately trying to foster at ICFP. So that's a lot of what what I'm excited about is just learning more about Colombia's experience and learning from their rich history, as well as the rich history of the region overall, and then having their experience guide and directly inform the experience of other regions too. But Nabeeha, I have a question for you. So I understand that PAI is bringing a robust delegation to ICFP and engaging in a range of activities and events. So I'd love to hear more about what you all decided to make, why you decided to make ICFP a priority, and what you hope to get out of it too.
Oh, well, thank you, Phil. First, I'll say, and I don't know if you're aware, but I was born in Pakistan, raised in Mexico. So Mexico City is home for me. And I was so excited when Colombia was announced, not just because Colombia's in the region, but also because of the experience of the region. I mean, donors largely abandoned Latin America and the Caribbean over a decade ago. And I think about what have been the boldest commitments, from a commitment to zero family planning, commitment to safe abortion, commitment to ending teen pregnancy, and so on and so forth. That has come from the Latin American region. And it has come because civil society remains steadfast and they mobilize and they hold their leaders accountable. And that is, again, the region where, well, I will say we see some of the boldest actions. And I think in this moment, so much learning from our colleagues in Latin America and the Caribbean of how they did it, even when the funding wasn't there. And I'm not advocating that we need to do all the things without the funding, but there's something to be said about the learning from the region, that communities didn't give up, and we see the boldest policies and commitments coming out of the region. Still a lot more to do, but that is the backdrop of my excitement. I think from an organization, the reason ICFP is a big priority for us is that this is the moment for our sector to come together. All those pressures coming into play, as we've talked about, and from our vantage point, we can't afford to sit on the sidelines. We really want to recognize and we want to be part of shaping that future agenda. And we are bringing, for us, a pretty big delegation of 13 PAI staff members and partners from DC, Malawi, Peru, Mexico, and Zambia. And it's an opportunity to spotlight the progress for women and young people, to share that evidence and learn from each other and what we need to do differently and more of. And I think just the bottom line in all of this is, while there are governments that might be stepping back and we're dealing with a lot of antagonism toward our movement, there's also, just in the numbers that you've noted, but beyond that, governments and researchers, advocates, others who are still remaining steadfast. And I think we've got to collectively own that narrative and advance that narrative of our work, of our progress, and what we really need to do to continue to fuel our collective resilience. So that's why we're there. That's why I'm excited about it, and just can't wait to be in community with everyone.
Great. Love it.
Yeah. So, missed all of that. And thank you so much for the question, Phil. Just speaking of a gathering that is so inspiring, and also noting that it is a complicated and sobering backdrop. Very few of us, if any of us, could have imagined the cuts to ODA and the narrative and all of the things that, all of us are feeling so acutely. And we're seeing the impact as well to our programs due to those funding cuts and the policy conversations. So while it's very important for us to come together, it also feels like we're in a new and a very different moment. And how are we going to use the conference and this moment to have a different type of conversation? One that attracts new partners, that appeals to new donors, that builds new champions beyond our traditional base who are so valued and beloved. We need them to stay. But to your point, I mean, I think you said it before, is how do we have this conversation in other spaces with other sectors? And what is this conference going to enable for that?
Yeah, exactly. So really, to that question, to be, I think I have 2 points. So first of all, like I mentioned earlier, I think I never have to convince anyone that I talk to at ICFP about the value of family planning, reproductive health. That's never an issue. It's not even something that crosses your mind because by virtue of the fact that you're there, it basically says that you value it and you acknowledge the huge importance of the work that we do. But I think for people, there's a lot of people out there that have a sense maybe, but they don't know specifically why you'd want to invest in family planning, reproductive health. And then there's some people that might just be more resistant. But I think for us, it's critical, I think, to develop more skills and to continue to work on that through practice, to try to talk to other people that don't know why you invest in family planning, reproductive health, and especially directing your argument to people of completely different perspectives. And I think the beauty of what we do and the value of what we do is that you can make those arguments to different people really effectively. So I think continuing to work on that is something that we need to do as a field in order to continue to expand. And then second of all, one thing that we're doing at ICFP is everyone knows, or I think everyone knows, most people should know that one of the biggest reasons why you invest in family planning at a country level is for maternal health and child health too. So direct impact of family planning on maternal child health, and that's just so valuable. But I think what's not acknowledged as much is that investing in family planning also has a huge impact on other outcomes like climate change and economic empowerment and economic growth. So I think one thing we're doing at ICFP is highlighting research that I think most effectively illustrates the value of investing in family planning for new outcomes, for new measures, and new sort of landmarks like that. So that's one thing we're doing at the conference so that we can say it's not just about maternal child health, but it's all these other reasons why you'd want to invest in family planning.
If I could ask a follow-on to that, Phil, oftentimes there's a conversation about who is setting that agenda. So as you said, really highlighting research and research around new outcomes. Who is informing what that new research set of priorities should be? Who's informing what those meaningful outcomes should be in this moment?
I think it's an open question. I think as a field and for researchers, advocates, people working in programs, I think it's important for us to look, beyond just what we've traditionally, focused on and try to identify like new territory, new things that we can look at. And I think that's the value of research because research always has to look at new relationships. And that's how research moves forward is by evolving over time in that exact manner. And I just think it's critical that we do so by looking and exploring different possibilities. And maybe not all of them are going to be viable, but I think we will certainly, if we put effort in this direction, identify areas that we didn't previously acknowledge that I think are important outcomes that are enhanced when you invest in family planning. So I think that's part of like the research process, but also just natural exploration of the field and expansion of the field.
Yeah. Well, speaking of expansion, Phil, I want to ask you a question about the words that we use. And there's been a lot of debate about what words we are using, right? Are we using family planning and reproductive health? Is this the moment that we're doubling down on the comprehensive, the sexual and reproductive health and rights language? And, we've used that interchangeably. I think the conference over the decades has been sometimes uncomfortable with the use of sexual and reproductive health and rights, if I can say that, and wanted to focus squarely on family planning. What's your take on this? What should we be saying? What words are we using that will land and will resonate?
So I think it's important to understand first, like what these words mean and what they represent. So when you talk about SRHR, that for me is a bigger, sort of a higher level representation of our work. So it's broader than family planning that encompasses the full range of sexual reproductive health outcomes and services and measures and so on. Whereas family planning is more specific, and mostly involving contraceptive use and so on. And so I think the field, like you said, is engaging in this vibrant discussion of like, how do we refer to the work that we do? And there is sort of a tug of war between continuing to refer to this as family planning versus referring to it as SRHR. And I think to some extent, you could argue maybe that it's context dependent, and that for some, continuing to use family planning might be a good approach because the just the term family itself, I think, has a really powerful impact on the work that we do, and I think it's a really powerful way of selling what we do. And then for some, I think it's only by calling it family planning that you can get like the kind of engagement and buy-in that you need for for a country level. So we've talked about how we want to name ICFP moving forward. Do we want to, change our name and maybe include SRHR in the future? That's a discussion I think we'll continue to have. But the way we approach that as a conference is that we're still ICFP. We still talk about family planning extensively, but we continue to, I think, expand as a field. And by doing so, that's where we kind of embrace SRHR as a term that we talk about.
I was very excited as I looked at the program to see, to your point, granted, we are grounded in family planning for this conference, but there's a robust, more robust than years past. Although, as my grandfather says, never keep comparing because you'll always be disappointed. But I can't help but do it. Because I was excited. I was excited to see more sessions on safe abortion. I was excited to see more conversations around the LGBTQI community and some of the SRHR challenges. I know there's a range of very impressive pre-conferences, so I do want to get to that here in a little bit. But I think it's a journey that we're all on, and it's exciting that we continue to retain and prioritize family planning. In many ways, that is the entry point, but you're willing to have some other unique conversations that maybe we haven't given so much attention to in the past. So ICFP is a week long, and knowing that there are a few pre-conferences before, and I think a few activities happening the day after close. Tell us a little bit about, I guess, two parts. Let's talk a little bit about those pre-conferences, and then how do we keep the momentum going after the closing plenary?
Sure. So, I mean, I can't discuss like all the side events that happen at ICFP because there's so many. And that's what I think gives ICFP such a great identity for the field, is just that it's really one central location where you have all these, critical discussions for the field. But some of the pre-conferences and I think prominent side events that I think are exciting for me are one related to demographic dividend that takes place as well, talking about where are we with that, and progress in defining, demographic dividend. There's another one on family planning data and measurement that's going to talk about exactly the data issue that I described earlier. What are alternate sources of data that we could look to? What's the future of DHS and other large-scale surveys and so on? And then we're also having one great thing about ICFP is that we have some ministerial meetings. So we're having a ministerial meeting that brings, government representatives from around the world to talk about things like sustainable financing and demographic futures and low fertility in particular. So, with the increasing discussion about low fertility and fertility decline, we want to make sure that we, tackle that head on and have discussions about what countries are seeing and talk about their policies and programs related to fertility in the context of family planning, reproductive health. So those are just, I think, a few of the side events that we have. And yeah, again, really exciting events that I think of which I only gave just a small portion.
And today is the last day, I think, for registration.
That's right. Exactly.
So, yeah. So folks still have time to register. And please do so both virtually and in person. Is today the deadline for virtual as well, I think.
Yeah. And so, but also I think just to emphasize, if you don't register by today, it closes and we can't give registration at the door, unfortunately, due to, security issues that we always have to have in mind for ICFP. So, just if please spread the word that if you need to register, you need to do so by today.
So to our audience members, we're going to go into audience questions here shortly. So if you have questions, please share them as Katie has indicated, and we'll get to as many as we can in this session. So Phil, going to hope a little bit, what keeps you optimistic about our progress in the SRHR space? What's giving you hope right now?
I mean, undoubtedly, the first thing is the people involved in the work that we do. So again, just seeing the robust numbers of attendees from basically every sector of work that we do in the field, having everyone come to ICFP at a time when I think we're all facing obstacles that we haven't before, I think is just really, really inspiring. So you start with that. You start with your community, and you start with the mobilization of all the sectors in the field, and the fact that we've reached the registration numbers that we have and are going to have such great in-person attendance from basically everywhere in the field and all around the world is, I think, it can't not give you hope. I mean, you have to be hopeful when you're surrounded by everyone in the field that's mobilized and ready to go. But I think it's also important to, Nabeeha, you mentioned that there are funding cuts and not every country is giving the same level of commitment that they have in the past. But, still in that context, there are, a lot of institutions and countries that are stepping up. And I think we're going to give recognition to especially countries that are making renewed commitments to the work that we do. And I think that's really, really inspiring too. So, I think it's important that we understand the context where we are, that we're facing some challenges, and it's critical to acknowledge these and have solutions. But on the other hand, acknowledge that it's not all, a bad picture. I think there's a lot of great things that are happening, a lot of new investment, renewed interest, and clearly, I think the importance of the work that we do, it's never been that greater than it is now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Phil, I want to go to some audience questions.
Great.
And the first one has to do with colleagues who've posted, specifically, I think a colleague from Ethiopia, but also extending beyond that, is if you can reflect on how Ethiopia and other African countries can sustain and advance equitable youth-centered SRHR progress, despite the funding constraints, some of the cultural resistance, and also the political challenges, while also being able to leverage the research, the innovation, and mobilizing civil society advocates to really influence the work that's happening as part of the ICFP agenda, but even beyond that.
So first, I just want to thank whoever submitted that question, because that gives me a chance to talk about equity. And the theme of the conference is equity. That's what we decided as the main theme for the conference, equity through action, advancing SRHR for all. And I think equity is critical to the work that we do right now, because I think with greater advancement economically and in terms of, some advancement in family planning, reproductive health, there's still a risk that people get left behind. And I think it's exactly those populations that we need to be cognizant of and be deliberate in making sure that our policies and programs address their needs too. And I think in that context, youth is certainly one of the biggest and most important groups, because, it's easy, I think, for youth to not be acknowledged and directly incorporated into programs and policies. And I think that's always a critical mistake. So I think making sure that everything that we do moves forward with youth in mind is going to be something a mindset that all of us need to have. But I'm also so thrilled every time there's ICFP to see, the vibrant, youth representation at the conference. And, this ICFP is no exception. So one of the great pre-conferences that we're having is the youth pre-conference that takes place. And that's coming up very soon, in fact. And we're thrilled to have it. And it's going to be, large and robust part of the conference. And I can't wait to attend that so I could learn more about, well, what are the youth thinking in terms of strategies? But from what I know already, I think youth have, with youth comes creativity. So, you played Otuk's song, and I love that. That's fantastic. And it's also like using art as a form of advocacy. And this is, some of these new approaches that you see from youth that really helps to move forward with the field and, inject some creativity into the work that we do.
That's wonderful. And speaking of the youth pre-conference, I want to go to some audience questions. So the first one has to do with colleagues who've posted, specifically, I think a colleague from Ethiopia, but also extending beyond that, is if you can reflect on how Ethiopia and other African countries can sustain and advance equitable youth-centered SRHR progress, despite the funding constraints, some of the cultural resistance, and also the political challenges, while also being able to leverage the research, the innovation, and mobilizing civil society advocates to really influence the work that's happening as part of the ICFP agenda. And I think in that context, youth is certainly one of the biggest and most important groups, because, it's easy, I think, for youth to not be acknowledged and directly incorporated into programs and policies. And I think that's always a critical mistake. So I think making sure that everything that we do moves forward with youth in mind is going to be something a mindset that all of us need to have. But I'm also so thrilled every time there's ICFP to see, the vibrant, youth representation at the conference. I'm speaking on the intergenerational panel, and I've been
Great.
telling the team that's organizing them, like, you invited me because I'm young at heart, right? So I'm really excited. I'm really excited to join that conversation and learn and hear young people sharing where we need to go, what we need to do, and quite frankly, also where we need to get out of the way. So the youth advocates who are attending that, please be ready to tell us boldly where you need us and where you do not
Exactly.
need us. We don't need to be in all of your spaces. So say,
Yep.
hey, we got this, and you all focus on these three other things.
Mhm.
All right, next question is I definitely appreciate this question. Whoever posted it around USAID, and just as a little bit of context, Phil, PAI, one of PAI's advocacy priorities to the US government, not only holding it accountable to ensure good policies and robust funding, but in large part, we, along with other coalition members, have enabled or had enabled $600 million a year to go to family planning and reproductive health in the form of bilateral and multilateral funding. So largely the mechanism to distribute those funds was through USAID. Now, the funds remain on the books for the time being, but there isn't this mechanism that was USAID. And the question here is that it sometimes feels like the world is moving on from the dismantling of USAID, the institution, including our own community, the family planning SRHR community. So the question is, will there be any dialogue on USAID? What needs to be preserved? What's that new landscape for this work when this institution is not in place right now?
That's a great question. And, for me, just personally, having worked with colleagues from USAID basically since I entered this field broadly, it's really hard to believe where we are now. But I think it's also really important to acknowledge this and also give some honor and tribute to USAID and the work that they do. So on the main plenary stage of the conference, I believe it's on day 2, which is Wednesday, or let's just say Wednesday. There's a tribute to USAID and the work that USAID has done. So the purpose of this plenary session is to acknowledge and pay honor to the great work that USAID has done over decades around the world. But then at the end, there'll also be an opportunity, I think, for USAID representatives to talk about their main vision and initiatives that were in place, back 9 months ago, and what they want to move forward, like what's their legacy and how they want to move forward as an institution, and make sure that, even though, you know, global aid, I think, looks different, from the U.S. perspective than it did 9 months ago, to say the least. I think we still want to acknowledge and try to move forward some of these initiatives that they had in place, and even if there isn't a USAID moving forward, the critical work that they did to some extent can still be evident in the field.
That's great. And, I know that we are all still fighting to protect and preserve that funding, and also ensure that our voices are not only loud, but that they are present in so many spaces to show that family planning and reproductive health still matter. They matter to communities. They've transformed the landscape, and we're not going to give up on it.
Yep, absolutely.
We've gotten so many questions. There's so many questions coming in, so we're going to try and get to as many as possible. The next one is this mention of the shifting donor priorities and the dwindling of bilateral funding. And I suspect that it has to do, yes, it does. It has to do with the ODA funding, in particular European and US. What do you see as the future of family planning funding? There are going to be a lot of donors, I understand, who are going to be at the conference. So what do you see as the role of institutional donors, but also especially governments who rely on this funding and really are affected by these deep cuts in ODA?
Yeah, I think with the big cuts to USAID and others across the field, I think basically that means that there's more emphasis on domestic resource mobilization. So that's going to be one of the biggest themes of the conference, is looking at financing. So one of our first plenaries at the conference is a high-level overview of where we are with global financing for global health, but then also particularly the work that we do. And so this presentation will talk about where are we globally, regionally, and in terms of country context, what countries are hit, which ones aren't, and so on. So I think this is where you have to start, because then it tells you, well, where are resources most lacking versus where maybe our things are, not too bad overall. So this, I think, will be sort of a level setting presentation, and will help to sort of guide future discussions at the conference. But then following from that, we have several sessions talking about domestic resource mobilization, including ministerial meeting, where there's going to be a number of the donors and international financial institutions joining, so that we can talk to ministers from around the world about where are they with domestic resource mobilization, where are their needs, how do they plan to move forward, and initiate that discussion that we hope will carry forward after the conference as a series of discussions at future conferences, other venues moving forward. So one of the critical things I think we want to do is acknowledge that with global funding being less than what it was before, that domestic resource mobilization is even more important, and we need to focus on that. But I think, again, with some donors lacking in the field, I think others have stepped up too. And there's a possibility of maybe high net worth individuals being brought into the field as well. And there are some initiatives, deliberate initiatives like PRISM, that I think are designed to foster that for the field too. So we have to continually look for new sources of support for the work that we do. And again, a critical part of that is making sure that we can describe the work that we do and the value of the work differently depending on who the audience is, to be able to expand our base overall support.
That's great. And these other new initiatives to mobilize new resources and coming from other spaces. And I think also the ongoing conversation of what does the financing architecture actually look like, and how do we build in a way that is more sustainable and mitigate some of these shocks that, of course, our sector has faced over the decades, but now especially acute. So
Yeah, exactly.
we work
And if
towards
I could
this not
add,
happening again. Yeah, go
I
ahead.
think the private sector is also an area that we should continue to explore too. And who knows exactly what that'll yield. But what we do know already is that there are some private sector entities like DKT and Bayer that have made substantial contributions to the field just recently. So I
Yeah.
think there's always great potential there. I think we really should acknowledge the value of these contributions and support for the field from Bayer and DKT. So I think that's another sector that we should continue to explore moving forward.
I think so important. And I would even say, even thinking beyond, I mean, it's incredible, right? To see DKT, to see Bayer, Organon as well has been a very important partner and player from the private sector lens in all of this, but also thinking beyond that. Who are the private sector members who care about girls' education? We know that one of the biggest challenges for girls to complete their education from K to 12 is because of gender-based violence, because of lack of access to menstrual health, because of other harmful practices. So I think there's some other sectors, and I'm actually very excited to learn from those other sectors as well moving forward in terms of the financing.
Absolutely.
So there is another question. It has to do with the language and the terminologies that are being used. And the question is, do you think changing the language and terminology would reduce attacks on family planning? We have experienced suggestions on the need to reconsider, especially when targeting young people and adolescents who have no families, that this language, the framing of family planning, does not really resonate with them. And in many ways, can exclude them from accessing services.
That's a great point. And I think worldwide families are becoming smaller. So just thinking about this only in the context of families, I think it's a great point that there are some populations that are missed, and this is one way that maybe youth could be left out. So I think I'm fully supportive personally of using like other terms like SRHR to make sure that it's more inclusive and reaches not just more populations, but more topics too. So one topic that I think is also increasingly important for the work that we do is infertility, because as we shift from focusing on, population, population design, population decline, I guess, or population size, decline, as we shift from that to trying to fulfill individuals' fertility preferences, I think that's where, things like infertility and related topics are increasingly important. So I agree. I think that's one powerful argument that you can make in favor of SRHR as a way to describe what we do. So really, I think this is a key discussion that we need to have at ICFP. So it's great to talk about it here, and I'm really glad you brought up that question. I would love to hear more discussion of this at the conference too. So I hope you can ask that same question to other people who are attending ICFP.
Fantastic. So those who are attending, let's raise it.
Yep.
What are the right words? What's the right framing for the audiences?
Mhm.
So I have a question actually from an ICFP trailblazer, Dr. Oscar Melvin from Uganda. Before I ask the question, I also want to add, I'd love to hear a little bit about the trailblazers, who they are, not necessarily by name, but just what makes them a trailblazer. And the question is, what do you envision for ICFP in the next 10 years in respect to SRHR in general?
I mean, that's a great question. I think for ICFP evolving over time, first of all, I think it's critical that there is an ICFP because without like some center point to convene in the field overall, you can't have these discussions. It doesn't allow for, moving the field forward the way that we do as an entity. So I think we're really looking forward to, having ICFPs in the future, moving forward to play this really critical role that we have as a field. And I think moving forward, I expect that we'll be engaged in a lot of the same discussions, talking about things like where do we get our data from and what are the sources of data? How can we continue to evolve and expand as a field? So I think moving forward with ICFP is going to also involve expanding, the work that we do beyond just looking at contraceptive use to broader fertility and reproductive health and SRHR issues. So I think this is one thing that we're doing deliberately. And one thing that we're doing in order to facilitate this too is by connecting with other conferences. So one session that we have at ICFP talks about how ICFP is also in tandem with other main conferences like Women Deliver and FIGO and so on, so that we can deliberately strategize across these critical entities and make sure that we continue to collaborate and evolve over time.
And Phil, tell us about the Trailblazer cohort.
Well, the Trailblazers are like an inspiring and always exciting group. So, these are people who are doing groundbreaking work in the field that we want to make sure to recognize at ICFP. So, one thing that sometimes gets lost is, or there's a risk of getting lost, is we focus on research, we focus on programs, but for the Trailblazers, we want to make sure that people who are really doing groundbreaking work, really innovative stuff, are recognized so that work can be shared to other people, other areas, other sectors, and that's really, sometimes you see those ideas, spread really effectively through that format. So I think by honoring these trailblazers and recognizing the work that you do, this helps to, I think, build like global momentum overall for the field. So they really play the critical role in that, is, injecting a lot of life, vibrancy, new ideas, and then helping to spread those around, different areas all around the world.
Thank you, Phil. I'm excited to meet all of them.
Me too.
Yeah. So Phil, you spoke about the need for data for decision making at the national level and the evolving space there. What about at the local level is the question. What are your thoughts on supporting political and financial commitment for SRHR and family planning reproductive health services through local data and local community engagement?
Yeah, so I think that's any part of moving forward with data, I think should have this local approach. So what we're seeing, what we've seen over time is that decisions that are made related to family planning and reproductive health are not all made centrally. We're seeing increased decentralization, across geographies in terms of these critical decision making. So it's not countries that are always making decisions about resource allocations and programs. It's states and provinces and even sub-states or districts that are making these decisions. And I think that puts more demand on the data to be able to accurately reflect these smaller geographic areas. So I think where we move with data in the future should be able to acknowledge that exactly this process, that the decision making it's important at the national level, but also important to be subnational. And this, presents, I think, some challenges, but a lot of challenges that we've already resolved and have good answers to as a field. Things like, statistical techniques like small area estimation that allow you, I think, to make inferences for these smaller geographic areas too. But I think that starts with the acknowledgement of exactly what you implied with your question, that we can't just be nationally focused. We also have to be subnational with our data as well, because that reflects the decision-making process more effectively.
So, Phil, over the decades, and it's not just for our sector. I think it runs the gamut across a range of sectors of the relationship that civil society has with the research, academic community, and vice versa. And there is a question here, but I'm going to add a little bit more to it because I do think this question is excellent. But I also want to hear from your vantage point, sitting within a research academic institution, what else we could be doing. And the question is, how can civil society engage with the government for effective domestic resource mobilization? And I would add, how do we better leverage at civil society the evidence and the research and the data coming out and the knowledge that's coming out from academic research institutions for our advocacy? How do we build a better bridge between the two?
I mean, this is always a challenge, regardless of the field. I think no matter what, like every people, every person I talk to that works in our field or global health or small domestic issues too, potentially faces this challenge of connecting research to policies and programs. And basically, I think that means it's really difficult. This is not an easy issue. I don't think there's a quick and simple solution. But I do think that part of the burden, and I speak as a researcher when I say this, I think part of the burden does fall on researchers to more effectively think about ways that the research can be implemented in programs, how it can be inform programs globally in the topics of interest. And sometimes as a researcher, you're focused just on the methods and the results and making sure that you have something that you can publish. That's all really important. But I think as a researcher, I think we also bear the burden to make sure our research is practical and that it directly informs, the work that we do. So rather than having policy implications as sort of a small paragraph at the end, I'd like to see research more fully embrace, policies to begin with. That's, I think, a strength of our field. I do think we do that better than a lot of other fields that I've seen, but it's still something I think we need to start by pushing ourselves. Also, on the other side, I would like to see more connection with civil society and make sure that the research questions that we ask are informed by the experience of civil society. So I'd love to see civil society also reach out more to research and integrate more with research so that we know that the questions that are critical are being answered on the research side. So a lot of this, I think, is about connecting people. And that's, again, one of the real valuable features of ICFP is that it deliberately connects people working in programs and people in civil society with research and data. So, this is one thing I hope to achieve through the conference is creating these kind of connections so that by attending ICFP, you can know better like what research we should be doing and how that research can directly inform policies and programs in the field.
That's phenomenal. And I also think, I mean, just the volume of abstracts that you received, and I understand that there's just so many that you can feature, right? There's only so much space and so much time.
Yep.
But I would be very curious as perhaps a little bit of homework afterward is to just see what were all the submissions. I mean, that in and of itself is, I think you're sitting on just robust thousands of topics that could be categorized that show where we have evidence, but also what are the themes and topics that communities are really anxious to talk about and elevate. So I have a secret wish to be able to see everything that was submitted. So we know
Totally
what does
agree.
the community look like and what are they covering?
That's a great point. And I think we want to focus on not just what was presented at the conference, but like overall submissions too, like you said, Nabeeha. And I think we actually have those data. And I think we even have some of them up on our website where it shows like submissions in terms of topics as well as geographic area of origin for these submissions and and some other background characteristics for the submission. So we have some information like that on our website, but there's certainly more that we can do. And that is like the type of analysis that we do after ICFP is report back on what was presented on what topic from what geographic area, by what author. And so this is exactly the kind of things that we'll report on afterwards. So if you have the same question that Nabeeha just said, expect an answer, and please reach out if you don't see it.
I have one more question from the audience, and it actually was a comment, but an important discussion that's happening. And I see more and more momentum on this, especially as of late, around the life cycle approach to SRHR and the exclusion in the discussion of those who are outside of the childbearing age or older communities. So how do we tackle that and integrate that? I mean, I know we can't be all things to all people, but I do think the SRHR community needs to be much more holistic, and policy as a result must be much more holistic in terms of meeting the needs of women and older adults as well. So talk to me a little bit about that and your point of view.
Absolutely. I think that's a great question, and I love the idea. So I think one thing that we're seeing more of in not just this field, but others, is embracing what we call the life course approach. And one of the critical themes of the life course approach is the concept that earlier life influences impact later life outcomes. So if you follow people over time, you can look at if they experience something in their teens, that still has an impact like into 20s and 30s and maybe even later. So this is where you're talking about things like school dropout and early, teenage pregnancy and and other similar outcomes where that if you experience at early ages, this has long, profound, lasting outcomes. So I think just that as a concept, using this life course approach, that we live in a continuum, and impact in earlier life stages has lasting evidence. And I think also the lack of recognition or the lack of incorporation of older adults in the work that we do, I think is something that we're starting to make progress on. So, we know that things like infertility become, more increase over time, and there's more research on infertility now as a field, which I think again breaks us out of just the family planning focus that we've had before as a field. So I think this is a valuable new direction to go into. But then also the role that I think one thing that's funny is that looking at the field and the data, one, I think, flaw in the data we have is that data, especially for women, but also for men to some extent, has usually only been collected during reproductive ages. So demographic and health surveys collected data from women from 15 to 49. So this kind of implies that once you turn 50, you're no longer important. Obviously, we know that's not at all true. And I think this is an area where we've evolved as a field, is that we know that there's still value to, people over 50 in the outcomes of family planning and reproductive health that we're interested in. But we need to learn more about that and the role that the over 50 play in this, as well as the reproductive health needs for people over 50 in the population too. So I'd love to see more of this. I feel like there's promising discussion in this direction, but I'd certainly like to see more of that. And this is maybe an area where we should deliberately move in the future to make sure that we incorporate more of this.
Great. Well, thank you to the colleague who posed that comment. I think it's very important as we expand the tent, expand our horizons, and really have the opportunity to think much more holistically. So, Phil, before we wrap, I was looking at the program, and I'm very disappointed because there's something that you missed. And this has to do with the life stage. And I see incredible colleagues and artists on there, but I don't see you anywhere. So I want to know, what talent are you going to be showcasing on the live stage?
Oh, that's a really good question. I'll need to think more about that. So see, the limited talents that I have don't really lend themselves well to a live stage. I'm not like performance artist. That's not a strength of mine at all. So I think I'll have to think more deliberately at the next ICFP of like how I can maybe showcase a talent. But that said, I think the important part to acknowledge in that with your question to Nabeeha is that the value of the live stage is not to show people like me. I don't need exposure. I don't need to show off any talents. There are so many people in the field that have infinite more talent than I do in a whole range of areas. That's why the live stage is beautiful, because I think it provides a venue for people to showcase all these incredible talents that they have. And then people who are less talented in that area, like me, we can just move to the side and be part of the audience. That's where I belong.
That's fantastic. Well, I mean, if you change your mind, I guess you still have a week. So you can learn some dance moves, learn some singing moves. Who
It's a
knows?
tall order, but I'll give it a shot.
Well, Phil, I want to thank you, and I also want to recognize, I'm sorry, recognize your team. They have been extraordinary, and I know this has been an extraordinary year. And I will say also from personal experience of engaging with them, they have done just a tremendous job reaching out, speaking to the community, building an agenda, accounting for a range of perspectives. It really feels like such a co-creation of what is going to happen next week. And I know it has not been easy. So thank you for your leadership, and thank you to your entire team for all the work that they've done to make this about all of us. And
Yeah.
I'll hand it over to you for any final comments that you might have.
Well, thanks very much, Nabeeha, and I do appreciate the opportunity to acknowledge the huge, actually not huge enough, like the team for ICFP that works on ICFP, dedicated people that have just tremendous undoubted passion for the work that we do, and the field overall. And we work long hours. We're completely dedicated and focused, and do a huge amount of work to make sure that ICFP ends up being a success, which we have no doubt that it will be this time. So, I think it is really important to acknowledge, the work that goes on behind the scenes. It's a huge amount of work. If you think it's a lot of work, it's even more than that, essentially. And in order to carry that out, you have to have this, this devotion and this passion for the conference in the field. So really important, I think, to acknowledge the work that my team does, and just glad to have the chance once again to thank you all very much for that.
Well, thank you for being here. Thank you to all of our guests who joined. And for those of us who will be in Bogotá, I look forward to seeing all of you. And Phil, look forward to seeing you as well in a few days.
Same here. Thanks a lot.
Take care. Bye, everyone.